Hey, so
I hear you.
all right, this is Dr. Rhadi Ferguson. This is Special Coffee with Rhadi. I'm here with one of the phenoms in the sport and the art of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Somebody that I've never had the opportunity to meet face to face or actually speak to until this particular time, but somebody that I really look up to, man, and I honor in this particular space and place because, you know, you guys know I speak freely on my thing. Man, there are a lot of jackasses and assholes in martial arts, and I'm glad that Robert Drysdale is not one of them. Professor Drysdale is a cool dude, man. I watched the way he's carried himself, the way he's governed himself over the years, the way he's matured, and from a boy to a young man and to a full-grown adult in terms of being responsible with his children, man, with his business, and how he's growing and propagating the positive things about the art. And I'm really pleased to, man, be able to speak with you, man. So, man, welcome, man, to the podcast, man. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Doctor. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the kind words. I've also followed you for many years, and it's unfortunate we never got to meet in person, but I think we have a lot in common.
Yes, and now I have no interest in rolling with you, but I would like to learn.
We can agree on that.
Listen, I'm too old now, man.
Oh, man. I don't know if I'm old. I feel old though, man. I feel like I'm 90. Like moving
around
hurts.
That's what happens when you push yourself in the upper envelopes. You hurt bad, man. You hurt really bad.
Yeah, it's jiu-jitsu, judo, grab. It's not natural, man. Like, we do it out of heart. It's the heart driving us. Our body is telling us to stop every day. Every day you get on the mats, your body is telling you don't do it, but your heart is always the winner, you know. And I'm glad for that. Like, I wouldn't have it any other way.
So, man, kind of walk us through, man, on the business side, what's been going on with you with this whole coronavirus situation and how you're able to keep your gym up and running. Are you guys open yet?
You know, we're not. You know, it's just, I mean, I'm at the gym right now. Like, I have like a private taking place in the back there, but like it's just one of those things, man. Like, I initially I was a little more supportive of this whole lockdown, and I think it's gotten to the point where we're verging on a Great Depression. And anyone who doesn't understand what a Great Depression means should read some history books. And, you know, if we enter a Great Depression, it's not about money. It's about well-being as well. And I think that remembering a little bit of what that meant to American families and families around the world during the 1930s, I think that we would learn a lot. You know, I think we learn a lot, and I mean, if we did enter a Great Depression, that does not mean that the coronavirus is going to disappear. The choice is not between Great Depression or coronavirus. The choice is between coronavirus by itself or coronavirus and a Great Depression. You know, and I'm not willing to go that I don't want to go that route, man. I think at this point we have to slowly start opening up, and I say this with a lot of hesitation, with a lot of respect for people that are at risk, you know, and I really don't hope not to sound condescending, but I think that it's going to do more damage if we don't get the economy up and running again. And I think we've done our part. We've flattened the curve, and at some point, you know, it's going to be more damage to stay at home.
I understand exactly what you're saying, man. It's kind of rough because there's a point where no matter what your political leanings are, if the country goes into a depressed state in terms of economics, we put ourselves at a risk in terms of national security. And I don't think people understand that particular part. The United States is based upon capitalism. Capitalism requires labor. So even though nothing changed in terms of the money, when the labor stopped in the United States, we went into a depression because we need labor keeps our economy running, whether we like it or don't like it, whether we like the North American Free Trade Agreement or you don't, or if you like privatized jail systems or you don't. The bottom line is, and I understand all the other stuff that goes on systemically, we need labor. And if the people aren't working, the United States it'll fail. So there's a point where we kind of gotta get back to work. Otherwise, you die two deaths.
I agree. That's kind of how I feel about it. Even though I've been, like I said, supportive initially, now I'm in favor of like slowly opening up and getting back. Well, the virus is not going anywhere. You know, we know that the virus is there's no cure for this virus, and there probably never will be. Just like the common cold, we can't cure the common cold. We can't cure HIV. We're not going to be able to cure Corona, and it's just something we have to learn how to live with. You know, and it is what it is.
Well, now that we got that back, man, Florida just reopened, man. So it's really, what's rough for me, man, is that there's so much cost involved in reopening. Like, man, I got to get this place sprayed down and cases of hand sanitizer and got to buy extra dummies and, you know, tape for the mat and in and out. It's a lot of stuff, man. Extra cost that you really can't pass that cost on to the consumer. Like you eat the loss of not being in business. People say, well, you didn't lose that many customers. Yeah, but I didn't grow any either. And if the economy keeps moving and you don't grow, you lost. Right. So go ahead.
I'm already in debt. I'm already deferring rent. I think most gym owners are in debt, and it might be months, maybe years before we recover back to where we were. On small businesses, and that's how I feel about it.
Okay, man. Well, let's jump into it a little bit, man. Tell us about you. And I always thought it was weird or funny that this guy named Robert Drysdale speaks perfect Portuguese, and you don't have the. I mean, your name isn't Roberto. You know what I'm saying? I mean, your name is Robert Drysdale. Kind of give us a little bit of your background.
Well, trying to summarize the story as best I can. My father was a Mormon missionary, did his mission in Brazil. My mother was so he learned Portuguese. My father speaks Portuguese better than any Brazilian His Portuguese is flawless, better than mine. And my mother was a very successful swimmer, Olympic caliber. She's a step away from the Olympics at one point. She had national records. And BYU, where my dad went, was looking for a swimmer to complete their team. So they found my mom in Brazil. She didn't speak a word in English, but it was a scholarship, so she took it. My dad was the only guy on campus who spoke Portuguese. So that's where I come from. I was born on campus, BYU campus, Provo, Utah. Moved back to Brazil when I was 6 with my mother and my father. And I grew up in Brazil as a child, and then I moved back to the U.S. as a teenager. Back to U.S. a couple years later, 8 years in Brazil, and now I've been in Vegas for 12. So I've been going back and forth my whole life. So I'm a bit of a mess.
Are you a practicing Mormon?
No, I left the church when I was 14. I have a lot of good memories and a lot of good friends in the church, but I haven't practiced since I was 14 years old. And I respect the faith. I respect all faiths, but it's just not for me.
Understood. Well, I know we're on a timeline here because you got some other stuff to do professionally, man, but I want to jump into it, man. You've come up with this documentary called The Closed Guard. And I had an opportunity to watch you talk about it the other day. And you were one of the few people, man, who were actually accurate in terms of your historical account of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And actually, you've actually read some of the books that I've read. And you've actually you didn't do just a regular Google search, man. You've actually went back and read some books, and then you went all the way back to Brazil to do some of the original research. I've looked at the books, My Study of Judo by Koizumi. I've seen I try to tell people every technique that's in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I've seen it in judo, from the striking all the way down to the calf locks, to the ankle locks, to the straight leg, omoplata. I've seen everything. And they say, well, it's applied differently. I said, of course it is, but I saw everything. And the way that I heard you explain, I've never heard anybody tell the truth about it. Yeah. Tell me about your documentary, man, and what you found out, man, from the movement of the original Kano and then Beta and everything, man.
I think that we could spend easily 2 hours talking about just this relationship between judo and jiu-jitsu. But, we were talking about George Midi earlier on, and to quote George Midi, it's all judo. And that's the fact of the matter. I don't care what people say. What we do is not, that's true. What we do is not Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. What we do is Brazilian Judo. That's just, it's Brazilian just modified. When I say modified, they emphasize an aspect that Kodokan neglected. And then there was. And I think it was Kano's mistake. And I've said this before, and I've gotten some flack over it. Because, Kano he's a great man in so many ways, but he had a blind spot, and you can't deny it. You can't stop it.
As we all do.
We all do. He's human, of course. And that's one of the things that made me want to do this documentary. I've always been the anti-hero type. It's part of my personality. What you find is that people are people. And we're all flawed, and we can all behave as monsters at some times, and we can all do heroic things at times. And but there's no such thing as this linear approach and these people did everything. And when you look at the history of anything, you can look at the history of the civil rights. He was certainly a very important piece of it. Like any movement has its leaders, but there's a lot of things in motion for these things to happen, right? And jiu-jitsu is no exception. And I really wanted to, take a closer look at BJJ history and try to understand it from a historical perspective, not a fanboy perspective, for lack of a better term, and of course this comes across as something that we're trying to discredit, Gracie, the Gracie family, Carlos and Helio in particular, and that's not the case. But we wanted to tell people that also played a role, and we wanted to basically, talk about everyone who made BJJ possible. And there are too many people that were left out of the story, and we just wanted to tell their story and just broaden the scope of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu history, right? So we start in pre-Meiji period, because we want to talk a little about that and what Japan was like. We wanted to talk about Commodore Perry's gunboat diplomacy in Edo, now Tokyo, when he points the cannons at the shogun and goes, "You're either going to open your ports to capitalism or we're going to bombard you," right? And the shogun has no choice. The history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of begins there in a lot of ways, because Jigoro Kano was heavily influenced by Western ideas. You got to remember that ideas of education, ideas of sport, of physical education, right? These were Western ideas. They're not Japanese. So Jigoro Kano has been heavily influenced by the West. So we wanted to talk about that as well. We wanted to talk about influence and the two rules he belonged to. And we wanted to talk about how Kodokan came in this moment in Japanese history where they're trying to converge the traditional with the modern. How do we marry the two? How do we remain Japanese, but we accept modernization? So you can see this conflict and this tumultuous moment that Japan is going through. And I think judo might be the best expression of that moment, because judo came along as something that really combined some of the best that the West had to offer, like these values of education, or one way or another, we can't, they are Western. Kano is heavily influenced by Herbert Spencer. He's a thinker has a deep concern for the values of education, how that would create a better society. And judo became that. That's what the Do is from. So he distanced himself from a martial past, traditional past that he views as archaic and the world views as archaic. But let's keep it Japanese, but let's also assimilate the best that the West it's judo. And from then onwards, the story is more well known in terms of the spread of judo around the world. But when it comes to Brazil, we have this narrative that is very, very linear, very simplistic.
Let me say this for a moment, Rob, because a lot of people don't know this, and I want you to continue your discussion, but a lot of people don't know this. Japan, even till this day, sends proselytizers out to teach judo. So there was an instructor when I was training at San Jose named Yamada. Japan has always, they send people out, just kind of like the Mormon church does, to proselytize judo. So they'll send some of their champions, some of their all Japan champions who never make it on the Olympic team. They'll send them to Sweden, send them to Russia, send them to Mongolia. They'll send them different places to continue to propagate and teach judo. And one of the places that one of those people landed, even though he wasn't necessarily sent, okay, was Brazil. But go ahead.
Yeah, so Brazil becomes especially after the Exclusion Act of 1924, where the U.S. shuts down its borders to immigrants, particularly of Asian descent. Brazil, which was already a large recipient of Japanese immigration, becomes the largest recipient. So Brazil has more Japanese descendants in Brazil than any other place in the world.
It's the second largest population of Japanese people in the world.
And so, it's undoubtedly that they would bring a lot of these, everything they would have, not just the food, not just the traditions, the customs, but also the martial arts, which were at that point, they were beginning to become part of Japanese life, because judo really had this vision of, Jigoro Kano had this vision of spreading, teaching children, not just teaching warriors, right? Raising better human beings, not only warriors, right? So many members of Japanese society are training judo. There's a lot of judokas de São Paulo. Some become more famous than others. We were able to find in our research, it's just not really directly related to the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I thought it was interesting, and we did some digging, and we were able to find that there was this man in São Paulo in 1922 called Takaharu Saigo. And Takaharu Saigo claimed to be the grandson of Takamori Saigo, aka the Last Samurai. I don't think anyone took him seriously, you know. But like I found that in the press, I'm like, I'll do some digging. Let's see if this holds water, because I don't think that he had any reason to lie. Like, no one would have known who Takamori Saigo was in Brazil 1922, and no one would have cared anyway. So why would he lie about something like that? It wouldn't have been prestigious. It wouldn't have made anything for him, done anything for him. So I did some digging. We found a friend of ours in Kyoto. They did some research, and we were able to find the family. And it turns out they had the family tree, and in the family tree, indeed, the grandson of Takamori Saigo, Takeharu Saigo, had gone to Brazil in 1921, 22. He had taught there for a while, and then he had gone back to Japan to continue to be a judoka. But it was just like one of those cool pieces of history that we were able to find reference of someone over 100 years, or just about 100 years ago, both in Brazil and Japan. But just to give you an idea of the scope of the influence of the Japanese culture in Brazil, right? The more famous ones are, Maeda, Sataki, Okura, some of them are Joe Mori later, Takeo Yano, Ono brothers, many important Japanese. Here's where the story begins to get interesting. If you look on websites, if you look online, if you ask any martial arts practitioner that is fairly familiar with the history of martial arts in Brazil, they're going to put Maeda on top. They're going to put Maeda way up there. Maeda first and everything after him. But then when you do some reading on the primary sources, what you find is that Maeda does close to nothing in Brazil. He's there, but he doesn't do a lot. He's the one that does the least, probably. But he's famous, right? So everyone, not just Carlos.
He's famous from the fighting.
Everyone claims under Maeda in the court. He's barely fighting. He's practically retired. And most of his fights were fake anyway. And that was part of
the carnival thing, right? It's westernized carnival culture.
So, this is one of the reasons why Kano changes it from, he wanted to dissociate himself from the term jiu-jitsu because it was associated with the circus, professional fights, fixed fights, and Maeda was part of that scene.
brother, listen, if I said I'm nobody. I'm glad that you're on, and we've never talked about this. I'm glad that you are saying it because people, I'm not trying to skew. This has nothing to do with a judo versus jiu-jitsu argument. It has to do with maintaining the integrity of an art, the integrity of the sport, and the integrity of what we pass down. Those things are important because what happens is they get conflated, and we want the sport and the art to grow. The sport can't grow if I'm going to Sweden and I teach something called the 100 kilo position and the person in Mongolia doesn't know what the hell that means. You can't teach something and then on one moment you say, when I get here, I call it Osoto Gari, but when I come down here, then I call it the side mount. Yeah, but which side mount? Keisukatami, Kazuri Keisukatami, Yoko Shio Katami, Muni Katami, Ushiro Keisukatami, all these are the side mounts. But and you understand what I'm saying? So the historical accuracy and the nomenclature is super important. I didn't mean to get you off your point, sir.
No, absolutely not. And I think that history can't be biased. History isanational. The truth is anational. You can't. It's not biased. It is what it is. You don't have to like it. You have to just understand it. And I avoid like the word truth in historical terms. Because it's such a loaded word, and it's not my intention. But that's what we're striving for. Like we all strive for coming as close to the truth as the sources and our flawed interpretation allows for it. I find that in terms of jiu-jitsu, there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of partisanship. I've been accused of being anti-American. I've been accused of being pro-American. I've been accused of being anti-Brazilian. I've been accused of being anti-Brazilian. I've been accused of being pro-Gracie, anti-Gracie, pro-Fada, anti-Fada, pro-Judo. So it's just one of those things where people can't frame the world outside of their politics, outside of their team, outside of their tribe. Like, this is how I view the world, right? And I'm like, we wanted to step out of that. I'm like, I don't care what you think or what, the perception is. Like, what are the facts? And you interpret the facts head on, free of ideology, free of partisanship. And that was always the intention, So, I've been accused of being pro-Gracie and anti-Gracie, like almost like with the same post, like something I'll write on Instagram and people draw like opposing conclusions, which suggests that we're on the right track, right? But going to your point, back to your point about nomenclature, I think I agree with it. It's very important. I think that was one of the most fundamental things that Kano did was to create a curriculum. And BJJ, due to its once it evolves off of judo, and I like to emphasize this, that it is an offshoot of judo. That is not even up for debate. It is just that it does evolve in a different direction, more ground-oriented, particularly later in its history, not early in its history like people think. Early on, Helio and Carlos were doing judo. You can watch the footage.
It basically changed in the last 20 years through the implementation of sport. But sport will always affect art, and art always affects sport. What you see right now in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu space and place currently is the same argument that was happening 30 years ago in judo, which is why Rickson Gracie and those people are so hardcore on the self-defense side, because that is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu's form of kata. Judo maintains and keeps the kata outside of Japan so that the core art doesn't change. Even when the sport comes back and it tries to impact the art won't change because it has the kata. The problem with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is because it morphed off of an original art, it doesn't have a standard foundation. So the sport affects the art so much that the foundation has not been set long enough for it not to shift and move. So as the sport propagates, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu will change and it will no longer be what you thought it was, which is why the leg lock game and why it changes the way Jiu-Jitsu is taught. And it's unfortunate because 20 years from now, it's not even going to look like it looks now.
You're right. I think that's a very good point. And I agree with you. Like, Jiu-Jitsu lacks that solid foundation that Kano, whether it was accidental or it was intentional, Judo does have. Like, it has that solid. I never thought of the kata as that foundation, like you put it, but that makes correct. A lot. It creates, like, this is the foundation of the sport. And then
that's why they try to make everybody, that's why, whether you like it or not, they try to make everybody do it.
Yeah.
Because that way, it's not, I learned the omoplata from Robert Drysdale like this, and I learned it from Dr. Ferguson like this, and I learned it from this guy like this, and I learned it from that. No. This is what it is, and it's standard version, and then everything from that they call what? Kazuri.
Yeah.
A modification of.
Yeah.
But everything has a standard form to
it. And in Brazil, there are no names, and part of the things we're going to talk about in wrestling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu too, it's important to remember that. Like, Brazilians still this day, they don't call it Jiu-Jitsu. They don't call it chave de braço. They call it armlock.
Armlock.
Leg lock.
Leg.
Americana. This is also referred to as Americana. Now, that didn't come from Japan. That didn't come from Brazil. That came from the influence of catch wrestling. I can't prove it. It's speculative. But I don't see any other possible origin other than catch wrestling. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu becomes this product of globalization. It is not a product of Japan. It is no longer a product of Brazil. It has
westernized globalization with a hint of colonization on it.
Thank you. And it has a traditional pre-Meiji. It has that colonial. Brazil is very colonial in many, many regards. And now you have an American twist to it because, that whole the trash talking, the promotion, the professional, make money at all cost. That's not Brazilian. That's American. Right? Like, people make fun of you in Brazil if you promote yourself too much. I remember we were teased. If you try to get your picture in a magazine or in a newspaper, your friends, your teammates would make fun of you at the gym, right? Marketing was like something that was deplorable. It was embarrassing, but it's changed. And that was like 20 years ago. That's not that long ago. And now it's one of the things that my students spend more time on Instagram than they do on the mats. So just to give an idea of how much like American culture has impacted BJJ. So BJJ really is this product of globalization, of catch, of judo, of other influences, cultural influences in Brazil, for good and the bad. I'll give you some good ones. Brazilians are highly, highly creative people. Mm-hmm. Creative people I've ever met in my life. Brazilians, they don't plan for anything. Like, you give them a problem, they'll solve it the last second, and they normally do a good job. That's the crazy part. They become brilliant at solving things the last second. Now, we can argue that's not the best way to go about things. Be that as it may, it's not how they are. Like, Brazilians are late, but at the end, there's a lot of good problem solving and creativity. And I think BJJ is highly creative. And that's a positive trait of Brazilian culture that has worked in BJJ's favor because it has become a highly creative martial art, and no one makes fun of you if you do something different. No one reprimands you if you do something different. There's an incentive by your coach to be different and be yourself and modify the technique to your favor. And I think that's a very positive trait, because it's like open software. Everyone can get better at it. Everyone can improve on it. It's not, but on the other hand, you're right. Like, there are no names. Like, I can't even, it's hard to have a conversation about jiu-jitsu on the phone with your friends, because like, you have to describe the move. Now, that one move that so-and-so swept so-and-so in that one tournament 3 years ago. Oh yeah, that one half goal. Yeah, the one, and it takes like 50 words to describe the move that in judo, like, boom, what we're talking about. So
listen, yeah, you can literally, I've been to training camps all over the world. You can go to the training camp with sometimes 60 different countries at a training camp, and everything starts out just clap, and then everybody moves, and then uchikomi, and then ippon seonagi, uchimata, osotegari. And you don't have to say anything, because everybody understands. You know the difference between, with udigarami. It's the Americana. I don't even know some of the terms. Like, I don't say bread cutter. I don't say paper cutter. It's katate.
And we can't agree on them, because every gym you go to, I make up my own names sometimes. I got my own names, and my students spread it, and they go to other gyms, and no one knows what they're talking about, right? So we have that problem, and it's a problem of globalization. It's like, once again, it's not a problem only of martial arts. There's no universal language for anything anymore. Like, English has become a lot of ways, and I think English will be the dominant language in BJJ. It's just a matter
of time. I don't know why they fight
Brazil and BJJ.
That was the most difficult thing for me, Rob, was how do you go from calling a move Osotogari and then going down and calling something Chave de Braço, and then start a match by saying combate.
There's no order. There's no organization. Here's the thing: what happened? This is IBJJF came to become the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Kodokan. First, it comes a little too late. It comes after the sport blows up. It's not created and then it grows from that. First, it blows up, and then they try to create a core, which is IBJJF. There's a second problem. However organized they may be, and however there's some many good things for the sport, in my opinion. They have helped give the sport more shape, or a sense of a shape at least. But there's no philosophical foundation. The dough is missing, right? It has become a sport of social media. It has become a sport for the masses in a lot of ways. But the culture, the philosophy of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, you can say that you like it. You can say, I enjoy this, and this is fun, and the fist bump, and the acai, and sit on the mats with your legs wide open, and show up late. I do think that in long term, I think that values and a deep philosophical meaning are superior to anything of that sort. And BJJ doesn't have that. And that is a bit of a concern of mine, because as much as I love BJJ, I think it's missing some key components that, are present in our martial art, like judo, for example. And I envy that. Like, I like the do. I think that, I think the respect, the hierarchy traits that are so ingrained in Japanese culture, I think they have a lot more value than people acknowledge. Like, I think, family is important. Hierarchy, respect your elders, thank you, sensei. We've lost all that. In BJJ, that's
bro, I need you to say that again. We've lost that. And let me tell you something. I don't mind no gi. I don't mind it. I've competed at Abu Dhabi. You are ADCC champ. Okay, I don't mind no gi. But when you let the no gi culture impact the gi culture, which is basically the do part that you talk about, then what happens is the behavior of the dojo is just off. Like, there's almost a lack of respect in some places. I really like Salo's place, because he still has a lot of Japanese mentality in his place. But there's a lot of places, man, there's no bowing, there's no respect, there's no hierarchical order. Like, there's nothing like that. And I don't want to be in places like that, man. When you take the martial part out of it, where's the art?
It's I think you have short term. You have young males. This is how a young male is. He's the average BJJ practitioner. He doesn't care how clean it is. He doesn't care if it looks nice. He doesn't care about respecting anyone. He's an alpha. I'm dominant. I'm in my prime now. and I'm just going to mess you up, and I'm going to dress up like a 13-year-old, even though I'm 45, you know, and there's all these things. I'm serious. Like, and that's the BJJ culture. It's a surf culture. It's a surf culture. And we got to keep reminding ourselves that, like, BJJ is not, it has lost too much of its age inside. It's kept some of it, but it's become surf culture. And maybe that's why it's appealing. I've gone back and forth on that. Maybe that's why it's so popular. It's a break from a rigid world of being on the clock. It's a break of having to be on time and your boss yelling at you, and that heart and the brutality of the business world. And then you go to the gym and everyone's relaxed and everyone's chill. It's hang loose, acai, tape your fingers, you know, take your time, enjoy life. It's Hakuna Matata.
Right.
Like, I'm full of it, but at the same time, I acknowledge that might be one of the fundamental pillars of BJJ's success, is that board short flip flop culture.
But when you surround it by your ability to kick ass, and that point when you can no longer kick ass anymore, a lot of things get lost. Because, like, look at the BJJ culture now. Just look at it. If you want a dominant ass kicker, or if you weren't fluffed up as an ass kicker, okay, people don't want to listen to you. So you could be a 4th degree, 3rd degree, 5th degree, and not necessarily an ass kicker, and a new young buck comes up, just wins the worlds, and the population of people will believe that kid knows more than you do. Yeah. Because there's no the respect and the order and the time and grade is lost. Okay, all right. I only have a little bit of time with you, so I got to ask you a couple questions. There's a guy by the name of George Meiji, okay, Mehdi. I'm not talking about the Meiji period when you were talking about earlier, who was a judo instructor. He died a few years ago. Very well-known judo instructor in Brazil. He was a judo instructor for Veligi. He was a judo instructor for Joe Moreira. He was a judo instructor for a couple of the Gracies too, and he taught them. He was very anti. Well, I don't say he's not anti-Gracie. He was anti-deceit. Okay. Yeah. He didn't want it. He didn't want. He wanted the truth to be propagated about the art. A lot of his guys beat up on some of the Gracies back in the day. Tell the story or some of the history about George Meiji, as you know it.
So George was introduced to art through the Gracie Academy. We know that story. We actually interviewed Armando Rhadi, which was an eyewitness, an observer of this, and it's on our Instagram account. You guys can look it up later. And he talks a little bit about this relationship. But, you know, George Meiji had a very tumultuous relationship with the Gracie Academy. They didn't get along, and you know, I wasn't there, but from my understanding, like, Helio wasn't always someone easy to get along with. He had a very authoritarian nature, and George didn't quite fit in. But he does go to Japan to train judo, and he lives in Japan for many years. And the story goes that George Meiji would have brought many techniques from Kosen Judo, right? The ground-oriented version of judo, right? Popular in many universities in Japan till this day. We actually visited a couple for our documentary. And he comes back, and he would have been the man who helped ignite a renaissance of technique in terms of ground fighting in Brazil. Because up to then, BJJ was very limited. Now, this coincides with many testimonies, including from members of the Gracie family, observers as well. Carlos Gracie Jr., the president of IBJJF, Hobson Gracie, the patriarch of the Gracie family today, Henzo's father, they told us they didn't know what a triangle was until the late 70s. They didn't know what a triangle was. Now, the triangle has been known by Japanese since the 1930s at least. There were Japanese doing triangles in São Paulo in 1935 that we know of, right? But I believe it's much older. But those are the ones we can confirm in Brazil, not even Japan. So my point is, there was certainly a culture of high-level newaza / ground grappling in Japan that did die out to a large extent, not completely, but it did take a big hit over the 20th century. And Yuki Nakai talks a little bit about this, and that was probably my favorite interview was Yuki Nakai talking about this dying out of newaza in Japan. And then Brazilians could bring it back because Brazilians got good. Where Jigoro Kano's blind spot, he had a tiny little niche that he left open, and that's where Brazilians come in and they allow that space exists long enough for them to carve out a niche outside of judo, and we're going to specialize in Newaza? Did they create anything? There's absolutely nothing that you're going to find from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and early 90s. You're not going to find in any judo book.
Listen, thank you so much. I try to tell people this. They don't want to listen to me, man.
It's a fact. It's not up to.
Not only the fact, even some of the newer what people think are evolved techniques, they happen because you haven't seen them after judo evolved as a sport, because sport impacts art. Some of the techniques got cut out. So some of the leg locks and the heel hooks that you think did not exist, they're actually in the old books. If you go back and look in the old books, those things are there. I remember somebody telling me about the daily heel.
Well, that suggests there's a high level.
The daily heel guard has been around for ages.
Well, what that suggests to me, you don't reach a conclusion of a De La Riva unless you have spent thousands of hours on the mats. Thousands of hours. An X guard, a berimbolo. I've seen judokas doing berimbolos. And what I suspect in the 1940s and 50s. So that suggests
it's a warm-up drill that we do in judo, Robert.
And I believe that. And what that suggests to me is that there's a culture of high-level grappling, and you don't reach those conclusions thinking about positions at night before you go to bed. Those are thousands and thousands of hours on the mats, and many competitors, many practitioners, even suggesting some degree of competitiveness, because you don't get that high-level technique unless you have spent so much time on the ground, right? Rolling competitively. So to say that Brazilians revolutionized the ground is a stretch. It's a big stretch, in fact. It's
a lot of hubris for people to believe that any person on the planet, okay, in their short span of life, has thought of something in terms of the physiological manipulations and iterations that you believe that nobody, in the history of the planet has ever come up with.
Yeah. No, it's almost delusional in some ways, and I think it worked. It did its job. It was a good marketing scheme, and that's why, going back to Medi, that's what Medi was so critical over. But there was nothing the Brazilians were doing up to then that wasn't in every judo book, a Newaza book on the planet. So to me, the revolution begins in 1994 with the inception of IBJJF and high-level jiu-jitsu competition. That's when you can see BJJ taking a leap in terms of ground, like a sophisticated groundwork. Up to then, Brazilians were good on the ground, but if you look at what they're doing, there was nothing highly sophisticated. It was very basic, in fact. And after 94, that we see the more sophisticated version of De La Riva, the X guard. And today, like, you see that, like today, it's like a whole new level. You don't have to like it. I know I don't, but no one can dispute that Mike Mutsumetsi's BJJ is highly sophisticated, right? More than anything else we have ever seen in the history of the sport, or judo or Brazilian jiu-jitsu. We are at the pinnacle of ground grappling in terms of what you can do with the gi, as long as you're not punching. There's nothing. We're at the zenith, to quote my own team, I love that word, of where grappling has been in this stage in our history. But it didn't start until much, much later. 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, Brazilians were not ahead of the Japanese. And but that's a common perception, and that's what the documentary is trying to do, is to fix that.
Let me say this, and then I have to fire some questions at you around 2:15, because I know you got to go at 2:30. But
I have to go before that. My battery's dying, man. I'm at 3%.
Okay. Yeah, 3%?
If I lose...
Yeah, 3%? Okay, so...
3%. I'm almost...
Okay. All right, so then I got to ask you the question. So the question was, how long did Carlos Gracie study with any Japanese judokas or jiu-jitsu instructors before opening the Gracie Academy?
So what I'm going to say next, I don't want people to take it as an attack, because it isn't. Carlos Gracie, no doubt, plays a role in the evolution of BJJ out of judo. In the same way Dana White plays a role in MMA. Dana White is fundamental for MMA. But did he create any techniques? Did he revolutionize the art of MMA? I wouldn't say so. I think that Carlos is fundamental for a number of reasons, but there's no evidence he ever even met my idol. There's some suggestive evidence for that. His father was a circus owner. He was invited to teach jiu-jitsu under Donato Pires dos Reis in 1928 in Minas Gerais. So there's some things that suggest that he did try. And we have with Donato Pires dos Reis in 1921, I believe now from memory. The problem is that newspaper article quotes Carlos Gracie, or Oscar Gracie, really. There's a typo there, like, not typo, but like a reporter made an honest mistake regarding the first name, but the second name can't be a mistake. And basically, he claims that Jacinto Ferro was the instructor of Oscar Gracie, most likely Carlos. So what that suggests is Jacinto Ferro was Maeda's right-hand guy. So what we know of Maeda and Belém do Pará is when he gets there, he's practically retired. He's not teaching a whole bunch. He's more involved with Japanese immigration. Like, that's his new job, so to speak. He's not interested in fighting anymore. And he passes on the torch to Jacinto Ferro and some other Brazilians who he did promote. He did promote them. We just don't know exactly what rank. And I wrote an article about this. I can send it to you later. It's just a matter of what rank he promoted. It was what we call today a brown belt, or what we call a shodan, a first degree black belt in judo. That's what we don't know for sure, how the reporter worded it.
Right, because based upon how it's worded, because the brown belt goes 3, 2, 1, and the showdown starts at 1. So the third degree, what you think a third degree of brown belt is actually a first degree brown belt, but it's close to being a first dan. So it's
exactly, and it reverses when you get a black belt. So that's why it's unclear. And I can send you the article. I'm sure you appreciate it. You're the first person to get that, by the way. No one has ever got that. You're the first person to ever get that. And that's why it's confusing, because the black belt had no meaning in 1921. It didn't mean anything, right? But Maeda does promote these black belts. The problem is Carlos is not mentioned anywhere other than being a student of Jacinto Ferro, who was his senior, and it was a known athlete in the region, right? Carlos also is going to be under Donato Pires dos Reis in both Minas Gerais and Rio de Janeiro in 1930, when Donato Pires dos Reis founds the Jiu-Jitsu Academy. There's no such thing as a Gracie Academy in 1925. Doesn't exist. What does exist is an academy in 1930 where Carlos and George Gracie are assistant instructors to Donato Pires dos Reis, who claimed to have a degree from Konji Koma Mitsui Maeda, except that no one ever saw the degree. There's at least one reporter who claims to have seen it, but we don't have, we don't even know what that diploma said. But Donato claimed to have a diploma from Mitsui Maeda. Carlos would also have an experience with Gio Omori, and it's not clear, like they were rivals, but they were friends. Evidence suggests that they were fixing fights to make money, right? Gio Omori didn't really speak Portuguese well. Carlos and his father were very shrewd businessmen. They know how to manipulate the crowd. Like, that was their strong suit, was marketing. Remember, Carlos's father was a circus owner, manager, and brothel owner.
Right.
So he knows how to promote, right? And that those fights were most likely fake. We have evidence strongly suggests fixed fights, and Gio Omori did claim that they were fake.
Rob, I don't
want... but Gio's seniority over Gracie...
I don't want us to get cut off, because I know you only have like 1% left on your battery. So here's the thing. Sorry. I need you to make me a promise. We need to do a second interview. Okay,
let's do it.
Let's create a date. Let's get a date, and then we can further go. We could do a deeper dive on this, and also give some people some background and reading. Do me a solid and send me that article. Tell people where they can find you, please, man. I appreciate you, man. I love you. I thank you for being on here, and let's do it again, man, within the next 14 days. He's out. He's gone. His phone died, but I'm glad I did that. So, ladies and gentlemen, here's what I want to say. That had to be one of the most remarkable interviews that I've done in judo or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I have been saying the same thing that he's been saying, give me one moment, for a while. I read, I research, I do my study. I am telling people the same thing he just said. Man, if you're doing Jiu-Jitsu, you're doing judo. If you're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you are doing judo. You can argue it all up and down. You have not read as many books as I've read on it. You've not read the studies that I've read on it. It's okay. Many of you who are talking have never stepped foot in Japan. That's okay too. Many of you who argue have not been in Brazil. That's okay too. And many of you have not done the research that Drysdale has done. This dude has done a deep dive on it. Went to Brazil, went to Japan, came back home, synthesized the information, took what the misinformation that we call the antithesis, applied it to his thesis of what he believed, came up with some synthesis per the hypotheses that were made, and is promoting a quality documentary. Now, you don't have to believe what he says. You are more than welcome to do your own research. But here's what you're not going to do. You are not going to propagate or push your depth of expertise on me. Do not walk up to me with a level of insolence and matter-of-factness when you have not read what I've read, researched what I researched, or talked to people that I've spoken to, and tell me things that you do not know. It is disrespectful. There is a reason why I teach the way that I teach. There is a reason why I teach jiu-jitsu the way that I teach it. It's because if you're not teaching it a certain way, you are not teaching jiu-jitsu. You're teaching an offshoot of jiu-jitsu that they call jiu-jitsu. That's my Black Kermit for the day. So you need to go ahead and teach some judo. And if you haven't taken any judo and you want to be a really, really good jiu-jitsu practitioner, man, take judo. You really cannot experience the sweetness of the fruit until you go back to the root. This is Dr. Ferguson, man. Have a super fantastic day. And remember, I love you, but God loves you best.